Hello and welcome to Going Dark, an intellectual dark web podcast. I'm Scott.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Peter.
So a couple weeks ago, the Golden Globes aired and comedian Ricky Gervais was hosting, and he went on a frankly just vicious and, in my opinion, thoroughly enjoyable tirade against the Hollywood elite in a very funny monologue at the beginning of the show. And he continued to just kind of lambaste the whole thing and the general pompousness and hypocrisy of the Hollywood elite throughout the show as host. It was, in my humble opinion, just phenomenal. And I wanted to talk to you both about it today, Jack and Peter, because it really resonated with people. People were thrilled about this. I saw on Twitter, on YouTube, I think his monologue has like 15 million views. Everyone was saying that this was such a glorious moment where he just knocked those people down a peg. I mean, the people that are really the highest in our society, right? These celebrities. And it got me thinking about what role the entertainment industry, sort of the entertainment elite. You hear us talk about the media elite, the political elite. And when I say media, I mean news media. But we don't really talk about the Hollywood elite and where they might sort of fit into the whole woke supremacist, social justice incursion narrative. So my question is, what place does the entertainment industry, the entertainment elite like Hollywood, what role do they have in the woke supremacist machine?
So I think this is very closely tied to the appeal of Ricky Gervais's monologue. For, I'd say, many years now, it does feel like the Hollywood elite has been punching down kind of at middle America. And it's really easy if you are making millions of dollars and giving a speech to talk about all the racists and bigots in the middle of the country. And people don't like that. People like to see the elites kind of brought down. And that's traditionally been the role of comedy and why it's so viscerally appealing. But when you have elites going up, lecturing people on really, I kind of, as Gervais pointed out, experiences and lifestyles that they have no firsthand experience with, it's really off-putting to a lot of people. And I think that's at least in part responsible for the decline in just cultural relevance of sort of that the Hollywood elite.
Viewership has been down for these types of award shows for years. The Academy Awards, I think they had their lowest viewership ever last year. We'll see how they do this year. They once again do not have a host. They don't want to deal with any potential backlash as the Golden Globes might have. But Peter, did you have more? I sort of along those lines.
Well, I think I was at least exploring the idea a little bit of why this monologue got so much attention and why people felt that he was saying things that lots and lots of people have felt for a long time about the Hollywood elite, in that they've been kind of talking down to the rest of the country, and that they're by no means alone in that. And in many ways, and maybe this gets back to a little bit of Jordan Peterson, in that, if you are in such this privileged position, it's really, really easy. Like, your life is really, really easy. And so you can, I guess, have the luxury of thinking about all of these things and like, what is the correct, like morally correct stance on immigration in every scenario that everybody has to follow. But this isn't like the reality of the day-to-day people who potentially, their jobs are getting outsourced.
Yeah, immigrants aren't taking acting jobs, right? Like, these are people who, by and large, are not affected by these issues. And a lot of them are also sort of, they're not exactly family people, right? You have people that are trying to maintain a country and a community where they can raise a family and have somewhat of an idyllic upbringing for them, which affects issues like, social issues like abortion and gay marriage and things like that, where people are trying to support family values. And I think that's a perfectly valid debate to have, the effects that things that like same-sex marriage can have on that. I happen to be for same-sex marriage, but I understand the debate over it and what it does to the family unit. But it is interesting. I just mean to bring up that, like, this is a group of people that their concern isn't having a family. I mean, isn't Oprah childless? You know what I mean? Like, a lot of that. Ricky Gervais, actually, for one thing, is childless. Yeah. It's like these are people whose chief concern is, buying a seventh house. And maybe I'll fly my private jet around, twice less each year so that it emits less fuel. But I mean, I think what I hear you getting at a little bit, Peter, or something I'd like to add on there is just he pointed out all of that in such an expert manner because, like a good comedian does, and almost like an insult comic, I mean, he was absolutely vicious. He pointed out the hypocrisy. He said, like, oh, you all want to lecture us. You all want to lecture people about virtue and morality when Harvey Weinstein was a creature of this world, and half the people in this room have thanked him personally for their success. And also that Epstein seems to have some connections to the Hollywood elite. And him doing that made that room fucking uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it was
great.
it was glorious. It was just glorious.
The thing is, we all moralize. Every person on this earth is moralizing in one way or another. But the difference is a lot of people try not to be hypocritical, or if they are hypocritical, they'll either call themselves out or people will call themselves out in their own lives. But when you have these elite celebrities on this stage and on this platform and no one's calling them out, and they're acting holier than thou.
There's no introspection at all from them. You never see, I mean, every once in a while you'll have someone say like, oh, I used to do drugs, or I cheated on my wife and I'm sorry, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But you almost never see them just, like, you'll never see a celebrity say, you know what, I used to believe some kind of homophobic shit. But they all did. Because 30 years ago, 70% of the country was against same-sex marriage. And including the vast majority of these celebrities. I mean, maybe not in Hollywood. I guess that was always kind of a bastion of, pro-LGBT thought. But it's like,
a lot of people try not to be hypocritical, or if they are hypocritical, they'll either call themselves out or people will call themselves out in their own lives. But when you have these elite celebrities on this stage and on this platform and no one's calling them out, and they're acting holier than thou.
There's no introspection at all from them. You never see, I mean, every once in a while you'll have someone say like, oh, I used to do drugs, or I cheated on my wife and I'm sorry, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But you almost never see them just, like, you'll never see a celebrity say, you know what, I used to believe some kind of homophobic shit. But they all did. Because 30 years ago, 70% of the country was against same-sex marriage. And including the vast majority of these celebrities. I mean, maybe not in Hollywood. I guess that was always kind of a bastion of, pro-LGBT thought. But it's like, there is a very much a holier than thou when we all know these are the people that are doing drugs, cheating on their wives, hooking up with pedophile island owners like Jeffrey Epstein and, creepy producers like Harvey Weinstein, and that most of them don't give a shit. And Joaquin Phoenix pointed out in his acceptance speech, these are people who take private jets all over the place. Which is bad for the environment, is my point there. So there's a level of hypocrisy of just like, these people get up there and they give these speeches, and I think it was Patricia Arquette. Yeah, gave a really, moralizing speech. Michelle Williams did too. There's always someone that get up there and give some political message as if they know anything about politics. They don't. These aren't philosophers. They're actors. And I've got news for you people. Acting is not that fucking hard. Okay? Yes, actors are talented people. I think Joaquin Phoenix, who won during the Golden Globes, is a phenomenal actor, and he did a great job playing the Joker. But it's just because these people are good actors doesn't give them some claim to this moral superiority where they're supposed to tell us what's right and wrong and how to do better.
There's a difference between speaking for yourself and then speaking for others. And I think a lot of them have this condescending attitude that they're going to speak for the voiceless, give a voice to those who do not have a voice in society. It's like, who are you to give a voice to people? Yeah,
it's like, oh yes, Meryl Streep is clearly the voice of the voiceless. 3-time Academy Award winning, net worth of $100 million. Probably hasn't driven her own car in 30 fucking years. Rides a private. Yes, she's the voice of the voiceless. Oh, please. The thing about someone like Ricky Gervais is, yes, he also happens to be a rich, famous actor. And I believe he's quite liberal as well. But at least he acts like a normal person. He doesn't act like he's better than everybody else. And he acknowledges his own ego. That's part of his persona, is like, yeah, I'm kind of an egotistical prick. That's me. And I do feel a little bit like I've earned it. So yeah, he kind of has that, but at least he admits it. Right? That's part of his persona, is like, I'm this rich and famous comedian, and it's out there, it's open, I admit it.
So I think you touched on something really important there, and that is narcissism. And if we think, especially in 2020, with Instagram permeating every restaurant and popular travel destination in the world, like, narcissism and like statistically has taken off in our society. And I think celebrity culture is like the like center of narcissism, because that's what fuels these people. I don't think it's necessarily, oh, I want to buy my seventh house. It's, I want everybody to think I'm awesome all the time about everything. And so when you have that mentality, both in individuals, but also just as like just in celebrity and culture more generally, that's so focused on celebrity, that's so wrapped up in narcissism, that it removes that self-awareness, because that self-awareness is punished.
Well, and we create that by feeding their narcissism. Like, as a society, the fact that we even have celebrities, the fact that, you know, millions and millions of people will call themselves believers or members of the KISS Army, or, you know, I don't even know what they call the fan clubs of someone like Meryl Streep, Streepies. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, there's millions and millions of people who will say, I'm a fan of this person I've never fucking met. I think they're really cool, even though they've never met them. And for all I know, they're a shithead who, you know, is implicated in, you know, Epstein and Weinstein's whole thing. And not a good couple of years for people with a last name that has the syllable Steen in it, as I'm now realizing. But anyway, my point was, we sort of we created in the 20th century in particular, with Hollywood becoming this major thing. I mean, you basically had the invention of the widely circulated motion picture in the 20th century. And immediately there was creation of like Hollywood, which is idealized in, you know, namely the 1950s and 60s as like the golden age, as they say, as it was portrayed recently in Quentin Tarantino's new film, for instance. But, you know, you have that golden age, and then we've held on to that idea of the movie star, of the star. We literally call these people stars. We call them celestial beings. Like, we make them sound so wonderful. We make them sound extraterrestrial. We make them sound like gods. But we call them stars.
Is it not natural for us to idolize as part of our nature? Don't we always look up
I don't
to
think
someone?
That's a really great question, Jack. I mean, I think in the past it would be someone like a pharaoh or a religious, you know, somebody who was maybe doing something like that. But never really so much an entertainer. Like, I'm sure that William Shakespeare and Mozart were appreciated in their own time. I don't know if they had, you know, a gaggle of teenage girls screaming their heads off when they would make a public appearance. I think that mass communications has enabled that to an extent. You know, like somebody like a Jennifer Lawrence or a Chris Pratt, you know, these people are ubiquitous. They can be found on everything all the time. And we're sort of propagandized as children to think that these people are so amazing, that they live in a realm above. They live in a layer above everyone else. They're celebrities and we're plebs, you know? And what I kind of wanted to get at with that tirade, if you will, about what we do to create this, as you said, Peter, narcissistic population of individuals and this narcissistic community in Hollywood is, should we just put a stop to that? Like, could we essentially end the era of celebrity? Like, has the idea of the star, which really came up in, like, you know, the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you know, that sort of half of the century was the birth of this sort of movie star ideal and recording artist star ideal. Could we maybe put an end to that? Like, with the internet, are we sort of seeing that, where there are sort of these mid-tier e-celebs who, you know, yeah, they're semi-famous, but they don't have the same level of like Taylor Swift level or Brad Pitt level or Meryl Streep level, like, oh, they're above everyone else. Like, could we maybe transition into an era where some people have a certain degree of notoriety, but there is not this sheen of untouchability, of godlikeness?
Well, I think the problem starts when these people who, by no other credentials than their celebrity, start essentially writing public policy. Like, they, like, as Ricky Gervais pointed out, like, a lot of these people are unqualified to do almost anything besides act, and they should be aware of that and say, okay, I have, you know, maybe very strong opinions on this one subject that I know very much about, and, you know, I'm really pro environment because I've researched this issue and I know the ins and outs, and that's what I want to make my life about, rather than I'm just going to virtue signal whatever issue is du jour. And I think we are going to idolize people almost no matter what, because this happens in sports. I mean, this happens in business. It kind of happens in almost every human. It happens in the IDW, right? Sort of any human institution is going to have its idols and its heroes. But I think what becomes toxic about the Hollywood narrative is the virtue signaling, is the, like I said before, like punching down. Like nobody, like if the people that you're idolizing or that you're supposed to idolize are telling you how shitty you are all the time, and you need to like do better, it's not really a great message to disseminate through our culture, because I mean, I can see it just generating so much resentment. It's like, who are you narcissistic prick, to tell me what my problems are?
Well, and doesn't this sort of, it shows that this is a very similar phenomenon to all of the woke social justice, grievance study stuff coming out of academia and the media. Because it's a very similar thing where you have a group that claims to be, so in academia, it's people saying like, oh, I got, a PhD in gender studies, so I know what I'm talking about. In the media, it's somebody saying, I've been on TV for 30 years, and so I know what's up. Like Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow, they know what's up. They're adorned in this immense power, in this, fantastic level of power by virtue of the fact that they work for NBC or they work for Fox News or they work for CNN. It's the whole idea of elitism. And I just feel like the IDW and other spaces that are critical of woke supremacy have not really looked into Hollywood and the entertainment industry as a whole as kind of a part of the woke supremacist machine. Because as you've said, I'm sort of making this connection where there's all of these groups have something in common, and it's the desire to tell other people that they need to change the way that they act, and a complete and utter lack of introspection. You'll never hear one of these, gender studies academics talk about the flaws of their own departments and of their own infrastructure. You'll never hear Rachel Maddow talking about the flaws in the mainstream media. You'll never hear somebody in Hollywood criticizing the way that they moralize, with the exception of someone like Ricky Gervais. And that was what made this moment so special. It's an exceptionally rare thing to see somebody be introspective about their own community the way that Ricky Gervais was, because he's one of them. Ricky Gervais is worth at least $50 million. The guy's a superstar. But, he I mean, look, you could say Jordan Peterson is to academia what Ricky Gervais is to Hollywood, and that somebody like, maybe to a certain extent, somebody like Tucker Carlson is to the mainstream media. These people, there are sort of these individual people who are able to shine a light on their own community from the inside. People who are able to expose the rot of a world where they live. It's like they bring news of hypocrisy from within their own home. And it's just, it's fascinating and it's glorious.
So I think Peterson has mentioned the dangers of, say, rom-coms. In one of his lectures, that's kind of the one example of an IDW maybe critique of, I guess, Hollywood, I guess just the Hollywood narrative overall. But I think it is actually an underexplored area, and part of it might just be intellectual dark web. The first thing you think about isn't like movies and entertainment, because in a way they play to your emotions. It's actively transporting you into a fictional world. Like that is the purpose of this entertainment industry. And so almost necessarily it is non-intellectual, but I think there is a lot of, I would say, non-intellectual value that the IDW can also bring to the world. And I think there is certainly an open space for, I'd say, IDW directed art or something like that, where it's maybe perhaps what Peterson is trying to do is restructure the Christian narratives into a more palatable sense for the 21st century. And I think there is an opportunity to do that, because there's clearly an appetite for, let's say, movies, TV, or even music potentially that doesn't just follow along with the mainstream narrative.
Well, I mean, I would point to Joker to a certain extent. So now, like, the film Joker is not an overtly political movie. It's not like this anti-woke screed coming from Todd Phillips, the writer and director. But it does have these vague elements of anti-wokeness in that the movie does seem to generally kind of have a little bit of an anti-media message in that, and spoiler alerts for Joker, if you're listening. If you look at, for instance, the portrayal of a late night talk show host mocking a mentally ill person and using them as the butt of a joke, and then that person taking a gruesome and brutal revenge on them, that's something that I think maybe the media was a bit alarmed by, or just the idea of the portrayal of an aggrieved white man. I mean, I think that was seen as something of like, I think that people see an angry white male character like Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Arthur Fleck of the Joker, and they immediately think of like, oh, well, Trump is an angry white man. Like this is, it immediately makes them think like neo-Nazi or incel in their basement, like alt-right. Like they just can't disconnect the two ideas. To them, an angry white man must be some kind of far-right political agitator. So there were these things that were so vaguely anti-woke about Joker, not really overtly. And I think that it for me, it made it more enjoyable. like especially in the context, it made it more enjoyable in the context of me watching the movie and being kind of refreshed by it. Of like, oh, like I could see why maybe you'd be afraid to make this film in the current environment. And really in the context of the media having actively gone after the film and making these ridiculous false claims that it was going to result in shootings at movie theaters and things like that, because it was this, pro incel violence movie. There were these ridiculous reports of that, which ended up being false. In that context, it made the movie like more enjoyable. And I'm saying all this, Peter, because you mentioned like, what if we had movies that touched on the culture war from the perspective of people who are against the prevailing, woke supremacist narrative. Joker was not that kind of movie at the end of the day. I don't think that was the intention of Todd Phillips in making it, but it kind of accidentally did a little bit of that. And so I just thought that was an interesting example. And of course you saw the media go after it hard. Well, like the Joker, it almost made me feel like it was the Jordan Peterson of movies, because the number of hit pieces, you know what I mean? Like Jordan Peterson has had more bullshit hit pieces written about him than any other person on planet Earth. And Joker has had more bullshit hit pieces written about it than any other movie on planet Earth.
I was going to mention that Peterson is always talking about narrative, and usually it's in the context of Christianity. But the myths and the narrative he talks about completely applies to movies and modern cinema. Everything is a story. And what happened with Joker, I think, is that went counter, at least in perception, to the media narrative of the white male incel being the Trump supporter, the someone who's creating this alt-right sphere of influence in our country. And so anything that doesn't fit into the woke narrative is going to fall into that alt-right narrative. And so any film that sort of is somewhat in that pattern, or at least perceived to be in that pattern, and countless examples have come out where they're trying to fit them into that story. It's just...
Well, yeah, there's people saying that like the film 1917 doesn't have enough women in it. 1917 is about World War I, and it has a speaking role by a woman. It even has that in the movie. Wow. Yes, there is actually, if you will go on, I mean, I guess spoiler alert, there's a speaking role, a pretty interesting role. I won't spoil it. There's an interesting scene in the movie 1917 with an adult female character. And I won't go that far beyond that because it's an excellent film that I recommend, by the way, and I don't want to spoil it. But there were complaints that the film doesn't have enough women in it. There were complaints. Well, there was some other movie recently. The Mandalorian, there were complaints. The TV show, The Mandalorian, the Star Wars, there was just not enough women, people were saying. It's just, this gets to this thing where it's just like, people, one of the things that I think people have been fed up with about Hollywood recently is they're not doing their goddamn job, which is the same thing as academia and the media. The media provides us with information. Academia provides us with knowledge and education. Hollywood is supposed to entertain us, for God's sake. Just make us laugh, make us cry, make us feel, make us think. Don't make us feel racist and sexist about shit that isn't racist and sexist. Don't try to moralize to us about politics in a way that is based on falsehood. Like it's okay to have a political message in a movie, but lately it's been so ham-fisted and so based on utter nonsense. And you hear these complaints from within the industry about like, female actresses not being paid enough and women not being portrayed in films about World War I. And it's like, well, guess what? The male actors are a bigger draw, and there weren't any fucking women in World War I. So, it's an industry that I think, like academia and like the media, has now ceased to fulfill its purpose. And so it's like, okay, yet again, here's another industry that is a part of the woke supremacist machine now, and that needs to be either reformed or replaced.
I do wonder, you brought up World War I. What's the proportion of men to women killed in World War I? And is that proportionate?
I'm going to say it's 99.9% men, 0.01% women, something like that. I mean, I'm sure there was like one battalion of women for some weird reason. Like there was one village where like there were 6 women and good for them. You know what I mean? There's always these stories about these women who take up arms and fight for the good guys. That's wonderful. This movie was not about them. It wasn't. It was about all the other. It was about the 99.9% of the British Army in World War I that were men,
and who died fighting for the free world so that we could all enjoy the life that we have today.
Yeah, but those men
by the way,
are old now, and so they must be racist and sexist, which is what everyone always says about old white men, even though they fought in all the fucking wars that gave us our freedom.
So I do think you brought up a point about Hollywood failing in its core purpose.
Yeah.
And I think more deeply. An even deeper purpose is, Hollywood kind of frames itself as this, bastion for social change and countering narratives and kind of saying the brave thing that people are unwilling to say. But it's kind of become that the institution now that needs to be disrupted in the same way that academia and sort of all these kind of blue church institutions are, where they are the tyrants now that need to be disrupted by sort of the upstart artists. And so I think that's potentially responsible for the just decline in quality of movies and kind of all the just bullshit surrounding them, because they're not actually challenging anything, right? They're just trying to fit into some cookie cutter recipe for what a successful, 21st century movie should be. And it's not actually about producing art. It's not actually about changing people's perceptions of the world, which is what really good movies and really good art does.
The only lecturing I enjoyed during the Golden Globes was from Bong Joon-ho, who directed Parasite. He is a South Korean filmmaker, and that's an amazing film. And he said in his speech that if you can get over that like 1-inch barrier of subtitles, you can enjoy a whole new world of film. Right, so that's the only kind of diversity I think that maybe Hollywood should pay attention to, is actual, non-white mainstream Hollywood directors producing film.
Foreign language
films.
Well, and how many of the woke people that claim they care so much about diversity in movies probably haven't seen Parasite because they don't know read fucking subtitles? Which, like, look, I don't blame them. I don't watch a lot of subtitle movies either. But I see your point that, like, there's an actually interesting message coming from someone that is a little bit moralizing. I mean, not so much moralizing as just saying like, hey, why don't you broaden your perspective on what you're willing to watch? Because there's some really great cinema, like my film, which has subtitles. There's an interesting message to deliver. Like that's something different. I was listening to that speech and I was like, oh, something else, something other than I want to talk about reproductive rights, even though I'm a fucking actor. I don't know anything about politics and government, but I'm going to talk to you about the environment and climate change, even though I'm not a scientist. I mean, it sounds like we're kind of this was kind of the purpose of my question, was to see if we would end up getting here, and it's where I imagined we would end up. It sounds like we're kind of inducting Hollywood and the popular media elite into the sort of group of institutions, along with academia, news media, and perhaps the Democratic Party. It sounds like we're inducting them into that group of like institutions that need to be reformed or replaced, possibly by the IDW. Sounds like that's kind of where we're at. And I mean, I don't know. That didn't surprise me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Who are, Peter, you mentioned, that we could, replace this group, this world with, independent other sources of art. I mean, who do you think that, do you think that's like YouTube? I mean, that's essentially a form of filmmaking, right? You have somebody like, I don't know if you guys like Filthy Frank, but I mean, he's an iconic YouTuber and he makes absurdist comedy. And yes, he never made any films to my knowledge, but he made really funny, absurd, interesting, and in my opinion, just really artistically fantastic and just well done comedy videos. As silly as his comedy might be, he did make iconic, and iDubbbz is like this too. A lot of YouTubers. What I'm basically saying is there are a lot of YouTubers who have managed to make iconic stuff that I think is much more influential than fucking, Captain Marvel and Black Panther and all the other fucking social justice, maybe Charlie's Angels and all these fucking, do you think that YouTube presents itself possibly as, I don't know, maybe not YouTube? Basically, what do you think is the alternative? Like if we were going to replace Hollywood with something, what would we replace it with?
I think that's a very big question.
Yeah. I mean maybe just independent movies.
There are signs that, let's say, like the Joker, right? And that potentially there is a desire to actually make good movies that people want to see rather than sort of scripted kind of narratives that are going along with just mainstream ideas. I think also, I mean, you brought up an interesting point about Parasite earlier, Jack, where that how many non-Koreans were in that movie? Like diversity score of zero, basically. And it's a fantastic movie. So it might also be the case that the center of movie making shifts outside of the U.S. Like it could just implode in Hollywood, and you know what? All the great actors will go to the UK, or they'll go to South Korea, or they'll go to Bollywood. I mean, there's a huge scene there. I mean, Alibaba's producing pictures. They can go to China. Wouldn't that be ironic that people have to escape the woke narratives in the U.S. by going to China to make movies?
I mean, the internet
I can see it happening. Yeah.
There's a lot of really popular content on YouTube that is East Asian or Spanish language, or it's like YouTube represents much more of an international entertainment collective than obviously Hollywood is located in California, United States, so like it is by definition a United States thing, a US centric thing.
I think the problem with YouTube is that Google is also one of these institutions that now needs to be disrupted.
I was thinking about that. I know,
and I think that presents the biggest problem with YouTube becoming serious about this. And I think there's also geography that's important, where you want people clustering together, not just on the internet, but actually in person. And that's definitely something that Hollywood provides now. And just the infrastructure doesn't necessarily exist to the same scale. But if more and more people leave, if more and more good film writers and actors just decide to go elsewhere, I mean, this is kind of happening with Silicon Valley already, where San Francisco is just imploding under its own just madness, whether it's homelessness or drugs or cost of living and NIMBYism and just ridiculous policies. And companies are going elsewhere. They're going to Toronto, they're going to Berlin, and these other cities are now kind of developing that ecosystem. So I can see kind of movies moving to somewhere else which is just more friendly. I mean, there's a big movie making scene even in Atlanta now. It's one of the bigger places to make movies. So I guess I'm relatively optimistic that might be one of the easiest things to change of all the institutions that we've talked about, because it's fundamentally driven just by what people want to watch.
Yeah.
And maybe you can fool them for a little bit, but like it's so much harder, I would say, to change something like the education system or the political parties, because they can become so much more ossified. It's not just eyeballs going to a movie theater.
You know which one, I'm sort of thinking about it now, like which of these sort of pillars of the old guard, whether it's, the news media or the popular media or academia or whatever, which ones are being replaced and at which speed. It seems like Hollywood, we're just starting to see the cracks. I feel like Ricky Gervais's monologue was a punch in the gut for the sort of Hollywood bubble and the sheen, the veneer of be above it allness, for lack of a better term, that the sheen and the veneer of being this otherworldly thing that is so wonderful and that everyone should aspire to. I think we're just starting to see that, but it seems like the first one that's going to go, it seems like the news media is like the first victim of the IDW, because I'm just thinking about like Joe Rogan's growth. I'm thinking about, like Hollywood, we see cracks in the windshield, in the glass, in the ceiling, whatever. You get it, the metaphor. Hollywood, we see cracks appearing. Political parties, we see cracks appearing. Academia, we see cracks appearing. News media, we see fucking giant sinkholes just eating them alive. The ratings are plummeting. The ratings of people like Joe Rogan and Philip DeFranco and Steven Crowder are exploding. That, I think, is going to be the first one. And that's going to, once that pillar falls, the other ones, I think, will be next. I sort of feel like there's going to be a very distinct order to this. And now I'm sort of thinking about what the order is. I feel like news media goes first. And then from there, I'm going to say comes probably the political system, and then maybe the academic and popular media systems. I think those are the two. The hardest one to replace is the education system. I think that's the hardest one. That's the one where I'm like, I don't know, how do you replace colleges? Like, it's so obvious how we replace news media. We have people like Joe Rogan who have these long-form conversations that are very educational and informative. Someone like Philip DeFranco who does good reporting. It's relatively easy to see how we replace popular media with things like YouTube. It's relatively easy to see how we replace political parties by not having fucking political parties and everyone's an independent and they actually give a shit about problem solving and real discourse. Education is the one. Academia is the one where I'm like, what? Why don't we
And oddly
replace
enough,
that
that's
with?
probably where it started.
Yes, right? It's like that was the source.
That's like
It's like
deepest.
once we get to the heart of woke supremacy is when it becomes the hardest to tear it out and replace it with our metaphorical pacemaker. It's like if the heart of our society is our education system and it's just full of shit right now, it's just, we got to replace it. Like, it's dirty and diseased with wokeness. It's like, that's the one where I'm like, if the news media is just like a kidney, it's like something that we can just kind of like take out, like wait a little bit, put something else back in there. The education system is the one where I'm like, I don't think we can just like tear down all the colleges while we figure this out. Like, those, they have to stay. Like, I don't know. That's the hardest one. That's all I'm saying. It's just, I think it's interesting. The news media, I just want to say, is like, it's so fucked. Like, it's going to take like 5 or 10 more years before it's just gone. And then the other ones, it'll take a little longer. The academia is going to be last, I think.
Yeah. I think political parties will also last a lot longer
You think so?
than you think.
I think once the news media goes, the political parties go soon after. I feel like they're propped up by the news media so much.
But I think it's to a certain extent, but there's not an easy replacement for it, right? You talked about easy replacements. And I think there's so much, whether institutional clout and history, and there's this just networks of donors and corporations and alliances. And, it's like this crazy, amalgamation of, different types of people and groups and sources of funding. And, you can't say this or do that because, this company gave you $100 billion or whatever. So I think it's actually really deeply entrenched in our society in some really toxic ways. So I think it will last a lot longer, and it might try to change or morph itself or potentially prop up the old news media. I mean, maybe that's kind of what's happening now, but I think it can last potentially longer and then collapse much, much faster than we think.
Well, on the note of the news media and political parties, I think that's a really great place to pivot to another topic we wanted to cover, which was let's just say, identity politics laden skirmish between the presidential candidates, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, which I thought was just fascinating and that I really wanted to talk about on today's show. I'm going to do my best to summarize. Basically, there was a report that Elizabeth Warren, there was a report by CNN that Elizabeth Warren was told by Bernie Sanders 2 years ago in 2018 that a woman could not win the presidency. He denied that this report was true, and she said that it was true. So you have a he said, she said situation going into Tuesday's debate last week. And then at the debate, the moderator who asked the question about this topic was just disgraceful. And I mean, I can't hide my disgust, even in trying to summarize. And I like to think I'm pretty good at, when I'm just summarizing a situation like this, I try to just give the facts. But for Christ's sake, the moderator, as I recall, asks Bernie Sanders she doesn't frame the question as, did you say this thing? She says, Senator Sanders, why did you tell Elizabeth Warren? Why did you tell Elizabeth Warren that a woman could not be president of the United States, could not win the presidency? So she begs the question. She automatically assumes, she goes all believe all women, which now apparently doesn't just have to do with sexual assault. It also has to do with any he said, she said situation where a woman's saying one thing and a man saying another. You just believe the woman automatically, which is what this moderator did, because she asked Bernie Sanders, why did you say this thing? Why did you say to Elizabeth Warren that a woman cannot be president? To which Bernie Sanders said, Well, he was like, I actually did not say that. That is not true. And so he denies it, as you would do if you didn't say, because I got to be frank, he probably didn't say it. It's a ridiculous thing to say. There is no reason why Bernie Sanders would ever say that to Elizabeth Warren.
No evidence.
And there's no evidence. It sounds ridiculous, and there's no evidence. So he denies it. He goes, no, I didn't say it. And then the moderator, this is in the span of like 90 seconds, and I watched this live, and I was just mouth agape. What the fuck is this woman doing? The moderator. She then turns to Elizabeth Warren immediately after Bernie Sanders' denial and says, Senator Warren, how did you feel when Bernie Sanders told you that a woman could not win the presidency? So basically, just to give you the play-by-play again, basically it was, Senator Sanders, why did you say that a woman could not win the presidency? I actually didn't say that. Senator Warren, how did you feel when he said that? That was, and I'm not exaggerating. You can look up the clip. Just look up on YouTube for any listeners who haven't heard it. Look up like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren debate, sexism / woman can't win or whatever. The key terms to find this clip, and please find it. I am not exaggerating. That is exactly what happened. And God, it got me thinking about a lot of things. One, it got me thinking about the media clearly hates Bernie Sanders, which is interesting because he's so progressive and at times pretty woke. So I thought that would be interesting to discuss. And also, this is obvious sexual bias. This is sexism, but it's not the kind of sexism people usually talk about. You always hear that you hear woke people saying that the media treats female candidates for president worse. I fucking dare any of those people to watch this clip and say that with a straight face. This was a clear case of a man being treated significantly worse than a woman, on account of him being a man and her being a woman. This was believe all women taken to its extreme. So anyway, to get to an actual question for you two, I mean, I can't hold it in. It was a ridiculous moment. And I say this as somebody who, I may have voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016, but I am not a huge fan these days. But I could sympathize with him in this situation. The question I want to ask you is, if Bernie is such a strong leftist, and he is so representative of the sort of new socialist, economic, populist, left-wing, youth movement, if he's the icon of that movement, something that you think the woke crowd, the woke media would be sympathetic towards, right? He's the icon of socialism. He's the icon of left-wing economic populism. If that's who Bernie Sanders is, why is he being treated so poorly by the mainstream media and the political elite?
So I'm going to take a pretty radical stance here, and I'm going to argue that socialism is actually incompatible with wokeness.
Okay.
And that socialism requires restrictions on immigration, for one, because if you're going to give your people a lot of social benefits, I mean, you go to Denmark, how many non-Danish people are there? They're very unwelcoming of non-Danish people in Denmark. Beautiful social democracy, lots of very socialist policies, very high tax rates. People take care of each other.
They're very white countries, the socialist countries, aren't they?
And but it's almost necessary, because you have, in order to have socialism, you need to build Trump's wall. Because that is ultimately what people will demand, because everybody is going to want to immigrate to the U.S. if we have 70% tax rates, and as a result, everybody gets a check for $45,000 or benefits. That's what 70% tax rates would do. And if this is, maybe Bernie isn't quite offering as much, but he's offering a lot. He's offering free college. He's offering,
he's offering to cancel all student loan debt. Yeah,
all student loan debt. I mean, universal health care. America would be a really great place to live. It would be a really expensive place to live. And you know what? That means we need to really, really restrict who lives here. And you really can't have both. You can't have a society that's open and welcoming, but also a very, very strong socialist country. And I think this is part of the right-wing backlash that we're seeing in Europe, where we have these very strong socialist democracies who then try to open up to refugees or other immigrants. And there's this backlash because people who are essentially entitled to all of these benefits, but have just showed up on the door of society, and it creates a lot of resentment. And I think in a lot of ways, what Bernie is offering isn't sort of this multicultural globalist world that the media or sort of the globalist elites want to promote. And I think his version is actually far more nationalistic than any other candidate on that stage. He
Do
just
you
won't frame it
Do you
in
really
those
think
terms.
it's that ideological? I think it's more personal. I mean, I see what you're saying, which is that Bernie has an actual very pure view of the world, which doesn't necessarily fit into the woke narrative. It fits into a socialist narrative that is built off of the models of countries that are like 98% white, and perhaps intentionally so, but perhaps by design. But I think it's something that's much more personal. I mean, I think he gets treated this way in large part just because he's a white male. I don't think the media thinks that hard about his ideology. I think they see his ideology and they kind of like it. They go, okay, it's something, it's left wing, it's socialism. It's, he says, he pays lip service to the woke stuff a little bit, maybe not as much as some of the other candidates, but he does a little bit. I think the fact that Bernie is a white male, and the fact that he doesn't go like whole hog with the woke stuff, and the fact that he's anti-establishment, the fact that Bernie chose to go on the Joe Rogan Experience, which no other political candidate of his stature has done. I mean, yes, I know Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard did, but they're not really on the same level as Bernie, right? They're not front runners. The only front-running presidential candidate to go on JRE is Bernie Sanders. I think that scares the fuck out of the mainstream media, and it makes them not like him. It makes them think that he is their enemy. He is someone who, should he occupy the White House, he's not going to play ball with them. Even though he is left-wing, he's not part of the media elite. That's not his world, right? He's some old guy who ran for mayor and governor. He was an activist. Like, he was a genuine ideologue, right? He ran so many times to try and become the mayor and the governor of Vermont. The establishment was never there for him. This is not a guy who is able to fit into that world. I think they don't like him because he's not one of them.
That's it. Yeah, and I think that plays into what Peter's saying, is that his worldview is different from theirs to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're anti-socialist. It's just the way in which he would go about it is unfeasible, I think, according to a lot of elites or establishment types. And it's the idea that he's not part of the club. A lot of people said this about Trump when he was elected. They're like, yeah, he might be Republican, or he might kind of play to this crowd, but he's not.
They're
really...
wild cards.
Yeah, they're all wild cards.
They're unpredictable.
Right? Tulsi, Yang, Trump, Bernie, back in the Ron Paul, Ralph Nader. These were all wild card candidates, and they couldn't control them because if you follow the money, they were not taking money from a lot of the same associated groups that a lot of elites and establishment types, media types, think tanks. They don't follow the same crowd, and so you can't predict what they're going to do in office. So it's a no strings attached kind of argument, I think.
I think in a lot of ways, potentially this exchange says more about Elizabeth Warren than it does Bernie Sanders, because I think Elizabeth Warren sees this as a weapon that she can throw and realizes, I have nothing to lose here. I can use this. I can weaponize gender essentially, and kind of use this as a club to beat my ideological opponents, and nothing will ever stick to me because nobody can ever prove that he didn't say this, and he can deny it. And it's he said, she said, and in this environment, nobody will come after me.
Yeah, she knows that she is the beneficiary of the "Believe All Women" hashtag, right? That she, as a woman, that is her, political inheritance from the woke movement.
So I think I could see her doing something similar with Joe Biden, for example.
Oh, well, you absolutely saw. Kamala Harris already did it to Joe Biden.
Right, but I think Elizabeth Warren could.
Yes.
I think so that's why I think it says probably.
Or Trump. She'll do it to Trump.
Well, yes.
It doesn't work as well on Trump.
He is the candidate.
Well, because he's in a different world. He's in the Republican Party. He's not, he doesn't need the media. It's not going to work as well on him. But look, Bernie is trapped in a space where he has to operate in this media environment. He has to go on these debates with CNN where they're going to treat him like shit. I mean, what a fucking disgrace it was at that debate. Just a fucking disgrace, the way that he was treated.
Do you think it was backfired? Do you think it backfired on him?
We haven't really seen the polling yet because it's only been a few days, so the polling isn't super clear. I'm predicting that it's going to backfire. I think people saw that as just absolutely disgusting, and that Warren... People are starting to turn on Warren. I mean, that was a bad move, I think, because Bernie is a figure that people don't... Nobody believes that Bernie Sanders is a sexist.
That's what I was going to say.
The guy has been a progressive activist for 50 fucking years. There's videos of him in 1978 saying, I just want all the little girls in the room to know that all of you little girls have just as much of a right to be president as all the men. Like, there's literally videos of him saying that in like 1979. Like, the guy's been a feminist progressive for 50 fucking years. He got arrested by the police for going to anti-segregationist protests. The notion that he told a colleague, his best friend, I think, in the Senate, who is a woman who was considering a run for president, the fact that the notion that the conversation went something like this, that she went up to him and was like, hey, Senator Sanders, I'm thinking of running for president. And then he was like, Toots, I don't know if you could, like, I don't know if you can win because you're a woman. I don't know. You've got a vagina. You can't even fathom him saying that. And so it's absurd. And the fact that the media didn't apply any pressure to her to provide a shred of evidence, they straight up framed the question under the assumption that what she said was true, to the point where Bernie Sanders denied it. And in real time, they repeated the question to Elizabeth Warren. How did you feel when he said it? I mean, Jesus Christ.
And in that moment, 100,000 Trump supporters were born.
Yes. No, I really do think, well, at the very least, 100,000 I am voting for anyone but Warren voters.
Yeah, CNN
were born.
CNN is trash was trending. For
and that was the left and the right.
Days.
Well, and there was this factor of like all the conservatives and centrists like myself. I don't know if you guys consider yourself centrist, but that's kind of the word I generally go to these days. All the conservatives and centrists were like, welcome to the club, Bernie bros.
Yeah.
Join us. Like, oh, you hate the media? You hate CNN? You think CNN is trash? Yeah, we've been dealing with this shit for years. Welcome. Yeah, it sucks, doesn't it? It hurts.
Yeah. And he has a very substantial and dedicated base in
a lot of ways. Pissed.
And I think, there could be, I've been reading about some of the political changes in Europe that have been going on, and kind of what we've seen is, the right-wing parties don't have enough support by themselves to win outright majorities, and they've been aligning themselves or realigning themselves with the Green parties. And this has definitely happened in Austria, and it's happening in Germany, it looks like. And so it does seem like there's this global trend toward some sort of realignment and changing of alliances in the political sphere. And I think this made it very clear, hopefully to millions of the Bernie bro crowd, that they have no place in the current left establishment.
Do you think there's going to be do you think the coalition that has comprised the IDW, which I guess does include some left-wing economic populists, so like Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein, they're kind of Bernie bros, right? They're pretty they're on the Yang train.
Eric Weinstein works for a private equity or a venture capital company.
Yeah, but he voted for Bernie Sanders. He voted for Bernie Sanders. I believe they both voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016. It's like, and they're on the Yang train now, and Yang is generally, his support has a tendency to overlap with Bernie's. These are left-wing dudes. It's like, I think, like, basically, do you think the economic left-wing populist, but not really woke, basically the Bernie Sanders demographic, could be inducted into the IDW coalition? Or is it just, because there is a certain amount of wokeness there, right? Bernie Sanders kind of plays footsies with wokeness, and so do his followers, but they're not like whole hog. Like, Bernie Sanders demographic is like Chapo Trap House, like scumbag left. Like, we don't love political correctness, but we'll play ball with the wokes. You know what I mean? Like, basically, okay, This is what I'm saying. There was a coalition between the left-wing economic populists and the woke people, right? The people who are just concerned. Could this be the fraying of that coalition to where maybe a new coalition will be formed between the IDW and the left-wing economic populists? Like, basically, could this be the beginning of a realignment where you see Bernie Sanders, basically, a lot of these Bernie bros, they're called Bernie bros for a reason. A lot of them are white guys. They're white men. The Democratic Party is really starting to fucking seem like an anti-white male party. You look at what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. You look at what's going on with Bernie Sanders. You look at what people are saying about Joe Biden. You look at the fact that this year, every single time a white male announced a run for president, what did you hear? Do we really need another white man running for president? That's appalling. Could you imagine somebody being like, say that 5 black women announced campaigns for president, and somebody was like, do we need another black lady? Could this be the beginning of a moment where wokeness alienates its last inter-ideological ally, which were the left-wing economic populists, who aren't really interested in political correctness and wokeness so much as they are socialism. But as you said, Peter, at the end of the day, their interest isn't in the wokeness. It's in something else. and they just were kind of like playing footsies with this group to keep it going. But this might be the beginning of a moment where these guys are like, fuck it, I don't want to like if this is how it's going to be, if they're treating Bernie Sanders, who is the king of the progressive left. This man invented the progressive left. He changed the face of the Democratic Party. He is responsible in large part with the lurch to the left of the Democratic Party. If he's being treated this way because he's a white male, and I do think it is vastly because he is a white male, feel free to, challenge me on that, then some of these white dudes who make up the Chapo Trap House economic left-wing populist demographic have to be like, fuck this, I'm joining the IDW.
All right, I want to say yes, but I have to mention something. So Project Veritas released a video of a Bernie organizer, a field organizer. He was a manager, I believe. And he was defending communism, the gulags. He said, no, the CIA lied about the gulags. They actually weren't that bad. You were putting political prisoners in there. They were re-educating them to better ideas. And it was rather alarming. Now, I don't want to be one of these people who be like, okay, one guy from the Bernie camp is out of his mind, and therefore everybody is a wash. I'm not saying that, but whenever you bring over a group of people, a large group of people, you have to consider the fact that you might be getting a few rotten,
I see. You're almost. Are you sort of saying like this is a group that would not be compatible with the IDW? Like if somebody like that dude, I think his name's Kyle. I won't say his last name.
Sure.
If somebody like that guy is a part of the Bernie Bro coalition, like are they at all compatible with the IDW?
Well, he even mentioned if they lose again and if the DNC,
they're going to beat up cops in the streets.
DNC
it was really nasty.
Yeah.
What he said. That's a good question, actually. That's a really good question, Jack. I mean, I don't know. You're kind of, correct me if I'm wrong. You're basically saying like, is that hypothetically possible that the group that includes, I mean, I don't know. I guess every group has their extremists, right?
You're right.
So you have people who are IDW adjacent who are kind of nutty. Like Alex Jones isn't really in the IDW, but he kind of pals around with the IDW. I consider him a nut. It's like, look, if the IDW crowd getting hundreds of thousands of new followers means we get a couple of nutters, sure, let's take in the Bernie Bros and we'll take the nutters like that guy and just kind of be like, hey, why don't you stop being insane? Like we'll deal with it.
Maybe
you know what I mean? And look, maybe someone like him, it's like if he was exposed to the IDW, he wouldn't be like that anymore. That's the ideal scenario.
That was going to say, if it's someone like Bernie or another progressive socialist and they're a good representative and they're a good example, then I guess it's okay if the nutters, a few nutters make some
Bernie
disturbance.
going on Joe Rogan was a big... Yeah. I'm sort of relitigating that now, like thinking about it again, how big of a deal that is. Because if he went on Rubin's show, how crazy would that be? Yeah. Like a lot of people who go on Rogan end up on Rubin's show as well. And if Bernie Sanders ever went on Rubin's show, remember people, Dave Rubin got Yang, Gabbard, and Marianne Williamson. Next cycle, 2024, I bet you he's going to get more of Democratic candidates going on his show.
So speaking of Democratic candidates, there is this Bernie Bro culture, and it's very much Bernie Bro associated with socialism.
Chapo Trap House.
Who else is there? Is there any other sort of figure to, I'd say, pick up the mantle from Bernie Sanders? Because really, I mean, I just don't see left-wing economic populism ever becoming a thing in the U.S., a major force in the
Yang
US.
gang, Yang gang, Yang. That's my answer, man. Andrew Yang. Yeah, I think probably. I don't know. That's my answer. Andrew Yang.
Does UBI fall under that umbrella?
Yeah.
I think it's a very different.
Their support overlaps a lot too.
So I think there are potentially a lot of common supporters, but I think the specific Bernie flavor of socialism just will never have enough broad appeal in a very individualistic, sort of capitalistic, competitive society.
Yang's capitalistic version of economic populism, because he's not a socialist, Andrew Yang, which is kind of why I kind of like him. I'm in the Yang gang, and I was like, I like the dude because he's about, he calls it human-centered capitalism, which I actually like a lot. It's pretty close to my own economic philosophy. I think Yang might be a really great, I'm thinking like Pokemon evolution. It's like Bernie comes first and then it's like Yang comes next, right? It's like he's the evolution. Like he's a much more palatable version of Bernie. He's also significantly younger. And he also is, as much as Bernie is pretty cool and he'll go on the Joe Rogan Experience, Yang has been on the Joe Rogan Experience. He's been on the Rubin Report. He's been on the H3H3 podcast. He's been on Ryan Higa's podcast. He's been on the Ben Shapiro show. Like Yang is like, I am the guy who will hang out with the IDW. He went on Eric Weinstein's The Portal. A Democratic presidential candidate went on to the podcast of the man who invented the term intellectual dark web. That's fucking awesome.
But I think he's also a relatively minor candidate, and he certainly
Sure,
does not
for
have
now.
the credentials or the experience of Bernie. I mean, Bernie, from when he went to college, from when he was in high school,
I'm saying give
like,
it
there's-
4 to 8 years. That's what I'm saying. Not now. Not
So,
now.
but I guess my other question, my follow-up question is, okay, so maybe Yang is sort of an evolution, overlapping, could potentially take some of, well, let's say reasonable Bernie bros and leave out the more extremists. But I mean, is there anybody with sort of those far left economic populist non-woke credentials that could take up the mantle from Bernie Sanders, or is the Bernie bro phenomenon just a one and done?
I think someone will take up the mantle. You got Tulsi Gabbard, you got Andrew Yang, you got Kyle Kalinske, who's a commentator on YouTube. You got people who kind of belong to that group who are pretty anti-woke, but they're pretty left-wing economic populists. David Pakman on YouTube. There's a little group.
But these are media, not politicians. and
Well,
not
so I said Tulsi and
activists.
Yang, Rokana.
But Tulsi is, I mean, she's very centrist. Like,
Well, not really. I mean, her actual economic policies are far, far left. But she's not quite a socialist, I don't think. She's kind of what you're... I feel like Tulsi kind of fits the mold of what you're describing.
Well, she's certainly anti-establishment, so she fits that role. But I agree, she's not going to fit Bernie's role. She'll
Why
never-
not? Her policies are like exactly the same.
Well, maybe...
She just... Tulsi's policies, a lot of people don't know this. Tulsi was one of Bernie's biggest supporters. Tulsi came to my college in 2016. She was an early supporter of Bernie Sanders. He was doing a rally. She came to come hang out with me and some of the other students. Tulsi resigned from the DNC's, I think it was like the co-chair or the vice chairs or something. She was like a vice chair or something. And she had to resign because you can't endorse candidates. And she wanted to endorse Bernie. And they told her she had to resign to do it, so she did. I mean, she was a huge supporter of Bernie Sanders. She was one of his only congressional supporters. He only had like 3. Like, he didn't have a lot of congressional support. Tulsi was one of those like 3 people who was like, Bernie. Like, I'm Bernie. I'm a Bernie bro. Like, she was his gal. And she, to this day, is a good friend of his. To the point where when former Senator Mike Gravel, who is also kind of an economic populist, anti... kind of isolationist foreign policy to a certain extent, anti-regime change wars. When he dropped out of this year's Democratic nomination, he endorsed 2 people, Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard. Politically, they are very, very close.
okay, so that's still a tiny coalition. I'm thinking of...
She's not super popular.
I'm trying to get the idea of, where part of what we're trying to figure out is, it seems like Bernie bros are going to, they're going to be ideologically homeless because, unlike Trump, right? Trump has reimagined the Republican Party in many ways, and it is a totally different animal now in so many ways than it was when he was running. And he was running very much as an anti-establishment candidate, and then the establishment sort of recoalesced around a lot of the positions and individuals that he brought in. So I think he kind of came in as anti-establishment, but has generated really broad support across a lot of different, whether it's corporations or individuals or members of Congress. Especially, I mean, even looking at senators. And I don't think Bernie has anything close to that. And so I don't think
What if he
the Bernie
wins?
bro phenomenon...
He might win.
He could.
He's in second
You
place.
never know.
I give him virtually no chance.
Okay. He could win.
Like, the number of never Trumpers is so much smaller than the number of never Bernie
All right.
folks.
I think he
So
could win.
It's...
The nomination or the election?
Both.
Okay.
I think he could win both. I don't think it's likely per se, but I think he could. But continue, Peter.
Sorry.
So my hypothesis is the idea of a Bernie bro is going to end with Bernie Sanders, and that this isn't going to be and that these people who are, the
So you think
Chapo
socialism
Trapas-
is a fad in the United States? I think it's got legs.
well, I think the specific Bernie flavor of socialism is
You think the not
the
really
non-woke,
woke,
right?
You think that was like a fad, and that it's going to just be completely supplanted. Like, basically, you think it's going to lose. Like, in a battle between those two, you think wokeness comes out on top.
I think it already has.
Yeah. No, you're
Well,
right.
certainly, I think
you're
this,
right.
I think this exchange
you're
in
right.
the debate showed that CNN essentially was up there and they're like, we have to take a side, right? And
Well, the
we
deck
went
was certainly stacked against the Bernie side. But yeah, no, I see exactly what you're saying, and I would tend to agree.
And like, he doesn't have the media support. He has barely any congressional support. He might have a lot of individual support, but I think those individuals are likely going to break off. Some of them might go into the woke crowd, hoping to keep, economic populism.
Well, you know
in
what
the
though?
forefront.
He's polling higher than Elizabeth Warren. You know what? This is a great debate that I think we can't. We're going to get an answer soon. I mean, Bernie Sanders currently is in second place in the Democratic primary behind Joe Biden. He's not behind Elizabeth Warren. I would say Elizabeth Warren, in the absence of a Kamala Harris or a Julian Castro or Kirsten Gillibrand, she's kind of the woke candidate. And Bernie is polling better than she is. He's in second place in almost all the polls. And in some cases, he's in first in some of the early states. Nate Silver, I think right now, and I consider him to be one of the better predictors. I don't really like his analysis of actual political philosophy, but when he's just sticking to the polling, I think he's usually pretty on point. Nate Silver has it like this. He has like 40% chance of Biden winning and like 25% chance of Bernie, and then like 12 for Elizabeth Warren. I think like 8 for like Pete Buttigieg. I know that probably doesn't add up to 100%, but I'm paraphrasing. So, Nate Silver has a 1 in 4 chance Bernie Sanders is the nominee. And I don't think that's inaccurate. I do think it's more likely to be Joe Biden. I think there's a pretty solid chance it could be Elizabeth Warren. I think there's a pretty solid chance it could be Bernie Sanders. I think we have to wait a minute before we start saying that Bernie loses to the woke crowd. If Elizabeth Warren goes down in flames and he rises like a phoenix and wins this thing, we're wrong, at least for the time being. How would you feel if he did win? But you're saying he won't. But no. But I mean, statistically, he has a very, very good chance of winning.
So the example that I gave with Trump, in terms of Trump came in as this outsider and sort of and created a coalition and sort of reimagined the Republican Party. I think that's going to be much, much harder for Bernie Sanders to do, because I think the Democratic Party has essentially already abandoned him. And I don't think they would take him up. I don't think the woke crowd will take him up, and I don't think the moderates would take him up either. And if you kind of think about maybe 3 biggest groups in the Democratic Party, it's going to be the moderates, it's going to be the woke crowd, and it's going to be
and there's one candidate for
socialist.
each right now. There's Joe Biden for the moderates, there's Bernie Sanders for the populists, and there's Elizabeth Warren for the wokesters.
Exactly. And I do not.
They're fractionated real bad.
Like, Trump was ultimately, thankfully, not an ideologue and just a total narcissistic pragmatist in a lot of ways. And I think, in a lot of ways we kind of lucked out on that, but it also gave the Republican Party a chance to learn and to reimagine itself. Bernie is an ideologue, and we know that. We know that from day one of Bernie Sanders. And I just don't see him ever reimagining the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, I would imagine, would abandon him before they adopt him.
There's one more thing I want to talk about before we wrap up, which is something that I've touched on as we've been discussing this. We were able to hit on a lot of the questions I wanted to ask sort of naturally throughout our conversation, which is awesome. But there's one more thing I want to touch on. I just want to ask this very bluntly of you each, Peter and Jack, because it's something I've thought about for a long time. For those of you, I guess we've never shown our face on camera. I'm a white dude. Your boy Scott is a white guy. I used to be a Democrat. I am no longer a Democrat. I haven't been a Democrat since October of 2018. And it was particularly the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. I remember telling myself, no self-respecting man, no self-respecting adult male could ever be a Democrat after this. And this Bernie Sanders thing kind of reaffirmed that for me. And it's something I really want to talk about on our podcast. Is the Democratic Party an anti-white male party? I think it's time to ask that question. I've been playing footsies with this for years. Initially I was like, I started hearing people were telling me I used to be a leader in college Democrats. I was pretty high up. I don't want to be too specific. I don't want to dox myself, but I was up there. And people were telling me that I shouldn't be in the position I was in because I was a white male. I know people who got passed over for promotions and jobs in the Democratic Party because they're a white male. Is the Democratic Party an anti-white male party?
Only in the way they talk about their candidates and in the way the mainstream media asks their questions. Only in those two senses, only in the way they kind of behave. But I think
So what do you mean by that? So they are in that way. In what way are they not anti-white
they're
male?
virtue signaling to that crowd. But I think through and through they're still establishment, and they will accept a Joe Biden over any other minority candidate as long as they're.
So you're saying because there's still a lot of white men that are in control of the party? I mean, that's not really. I mean, you got Nancy Pelosi, Tom Perez. I want to say is Latino. Yeah, he's Latino. So
I think
I guess Chuck Schumer's a white guy.
I think if you're in the Democratic Party and you're a white dude, and you're older, especially, like you have to accept that you're going to be.
I think you have crosshairs on your back. I think it's the whole thing that's been happening with Biden and Bernie is people are like, oh, fucking old white guy.
Yeah.
I disagree, Jack. I think it goes further than that. I mean, obviously, I mean, I've kind of been saying this throughout the whole book. I've been pretty out on this that I think that the white Democratic Party, I do happen to disagree. I'm just trying to probe your position, though. I don't want to straw man you. I mean, you're saying that the rhetoric is anti-white male, but that the party is still vastly controlled by white males. And so, but you're sort of saying that by definition, I can't be correct because the Democratic Party still has a lot of white guys in it.
No,
that's changing.
Yeah, no. Just to clarify, I'm just saying that it's okay to criticize a white man and to say that their place is no longer, at the top, but they're willing to accept those candidates as long as they are playing by the rules and they're part of the club.
I don't know if they are, though. That's what I thought was going on with Bernie. I thought part of it was like, well, this guy's a white guy. Fuck him. And you hear people saying that about Joe Biden, that he's an old white guy, and so they don't want him.
Don't forget about Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, and Pete Buttigieg, three other prominent Democratic presidential
who are all
candidates.
losing.
Who are losing, but to Joe Biden.
Biden's first.
To Bernie Sanders, number 2.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to say. I mean, it's difficult to look at the debate stage, difficult to look at the polls and say this is not the party for white men, just given how many very prominent, very wealthy, very powerful white men are running for president. So it's difficult to make that claim. I think potentially what you're getting at is as the Democratic Party has increasingly embraced identity politics, essentially they have defined themselves by who they exclude, and who they essentially seek to exclude has been white men, especially white men, working class men living in the middle of the country, right? Like that is their this is what this party is not about. This is who's not welcome here. And so I think that is true. They certainly welcome the billionaires who have plenty of money to donate to their causes. They welcome the Harvard educated, former consultant, gay mayor. No problem with welcoming those types of people into the party. But I think just when you start playing the identity politics game, you have to say, these are our identities and this is not our identity. And what the not our identity is essentially white men.
So I would posit that the only reason Joe Biden as a white male is able to be the front runner as it stands is because of his support from black Democratic voters. This is like a statistical fact. If it weren't for his black support, he wouldn't be in the lead. He'd be losing terribly. He does not perform particularly well with whites. And you might say, well, if that's the base of the Democratic Party, well then how can the Democrat, it's like these black people are supporting these white candidates. How can they be an anti-white male party? This is the thing. Do you think Joe Biden would be doing anything? Do you think he'd be polling at even 2% if he hadn't been vice president to the first black president for 8 years?
Probably not.
No. That's his pass, right? That's his white guy pass in the Democratic Party. You need a pass. So Bernie's pass is that. So everyone has a pass, right? So let's take the top 3 white male candidates.
Well,
right? Pete's is he's gay. Pete's is that he's gay. Bernie's is that he's a socialist, far left icon, and Biden's is that he was Obama's VP. You can't just be a white dude without a really, really good pass.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that was kind of my point about as the Democratic Party has increasingly embraced identity politics, if it fundamentally sets up the us versus them dynamic based on the most obvious categories that you can see, which are going to be race and gender.
Well, and that will inevitably exclude straight white males. So I'm basically saying, like, it's no party for white men, as some people have said. A little pun for the Coen Brothers movie. It's like, it's no party for white men. Like, this is like, why the fuck would a white man be in a party that seems to actively despise them? And like, I'm sorry, look, I hate to, because it reminds me of what the woke people do is they go, you're racist, you're sexist. I hate to play this fucking game, but past a certain point, you got to say something, because the believe all women thing is just getting ridiculous. That is a sexist, horrible idea. The idea that we're going to believe women over men. And it was demonstrated to be a real problem in this Bernie situation. And you also hear there's so much self-loathing. Didn't they do a report recently? This is all backed up by statistics, where it was the only ethnic group that has a negative opinion of itself is whites, especially white liberals.
Yeah, white guilt has become normalized even among friend groups. Yeah.
So let me rephrase the question. Let's say maybe the Democratic Party is or is not anti-white male. Is it the party of white guilt to a certain extent? Like, is the only way to be white, to be a white male in the Democratic Party, to actively disdain your own sex and race on some level?
Yes, and you must identify your privilege at every moment.
Right, like Beto did, and like Pete does.
Yes.
And like Bloomberg did the other day. Michael Bloomberg said, like, I have white privilege. That's why I got made $50 billion, because I was fucking white. I'm not kidding, by the way. This is like earlier today he said this. So can I at least say that? It's the party of white guilt?
Yes.
Yeah. White male guilt. It's, you got to be like, I have white male privilege. Even Andrew Yang, who's pretty based, pretty cool, said something about, like, we're a deeply misogynist country. Like, you have to pay lip service to that shit.
Can I ask you a question? Do you guys think that a Trump-like figure on the left could emerge, where he calls out this bullshit, but then he has very progressive policies, maybe even an economic populist?
Yeah, I think Yang hasn't really been doing that. Yang's not
in that way. Not in
I mean, I don't know. Ricky Gervais kind of did that. I mean, I don't know. He's a leftist. That's a great question. I honestly don't know how to answer it. That's just a really good question, Jack. Maybe. My answer is maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe if Bill Maher or Dave Rubin or some other kind of, centrist-y, classical, liberal-y person ran in 2024, something could happen. I don't know. That's a really good question. And my answer is maybe.
But I think more deeply, I mean, the Democratic Party really needs to figure out what it's about, because, I mean, it seems like this monster now where you have sort of these like groveling white guilt centrists, allied with the woke crowd, allied with the economic populists who don't give a fuck but going to pay lip service just because it suits their needs. Like, this does not seem
it's not sustainable
at all.
It's not sustainable.
And especially when you go up against Trump and you go up against the coalition that he has built. And I mean, I've seen polling numbers where, I mean, his support among Latino communities is growing quite substantially because, lo and behold, being Latino just means you're a person and you have like the same sort of preferences about liberals versus conservatives. And if the Latino community starts to vote the same way that white communities do, or
Latino men are like 1/3 Republican.
And right, exactly. And if they vote for Trump in reflecting those numbers, I mean, that is a landslide victory.
Black people are starting. I think Trump got like 8% of the black vote, which I know sounds very small, but Mitt Romney got like 3%.
Yeah.
So it was an improvement. It's trending in that direction. Somebody like Candace Owens, Kanye West, like they're starting to, these cracks are appearing.
So I think the Democratic Party, in a lot of ways, needs to reimagine itself because it is just this cesspool right now, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think that kind of one of the first signs that this isn't a sustainable system for them to be the party of white male guilt, of straight white male guilt, it has been this crack up between Warren and Bernie, because it appears that this is something that is not going to be good for the party. I mean, there's a clip of her going up to him afterwards saying, "I think you called me a liar on national TV," and he's like, "You called me a liar." Like it's very, it was nasty, and it was something that, Tom Perez, chairman of the DNC, was sitting at home going, "No, like, don't do this, like, be nice." But anyway, I think we have to sign off for today. But before we sign off, I just want to thank all of our listeners and viewers on the YouTube channel, on iTunes, on Spotify, and everywhere that you can find our show. and our videos and all of our content. We're at 500 subscribers. We're actually at the time of recording, I think we're at 530 subscribers. And that's really cool. We're halfway to 1,000. 500 is such a big accomplishment. It seems small compared to a lot of the bigger channels, but we've only been on the air for about 4 months, and we're just so thrilled to have you all listening. So thank you all so much. We're going to do probably some kind of official thank you video or thank you update or something to celebrate getting to 500 subscribers, because we were really excited to hit that milestone. And, from the bottom of our hearts, on behalf of Jack and Peter and myself, I just want to say thank you all so much for listening. So we're going to have a video coming out soon, probably a short update video where we're going to propose probably a question and answer type video as a celebration of reaching 500 subscribers. So stay tuned for that. If you like this podcast and you want to get to know us a little better, or there's some questions you've always wanted us to answer that we've never talked about on the podcast, we're going to do a question and answer soon to celebrate 500 subscribers. That is assuming we get enough engagement. So, we'll do a video, probably something akin to, and you may have seen this on other channels, leave a question in the comments down below and we'll answer it in our next video. And we'll probably dedicate a portion of one of our upcoming podcasts to answering your questions. This is assuming we get at least, 5 or 10 questions from you guys. So if you want to hear a question and answer, stay tuned for a separate video we're going to do maybe later this week, where we're going to tell you to leave a question in the comments for us to answer in a future episode. So again, thank you all so much for listening. 500 subscribers, really, really cool. And we'll see you next time on Going Dark, an Intellectual Dark Web podcast.